Ladies and gentlemen, imagine standing watch on a quiet night in the heart of Texas, where the line between history and the present blurs into something inexplicable. The Alamo, that hallowed ground in San Antonio, where in 1836 a band of Texian defenders held off Santa Anna's forces for 13 days before falling in a blaze of glory. Names like Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, and William Travis echo through time, their sacrifice forging the battle cry of "Remember the Alamo." But what if those echoes aren't just metaphorical? What if the spirits of that brutal siege linger, not just in museums or history books, but in the shadows of nearby military installations? Fort Sam Houston, established in 1876 just a stone's throw from the Alamo, stands as one of the U.S. Army's oldest active bases. It's a sprawling complex of over 3,000 acres, home to the U.S. Army Medical Command and training grounds for thousands of soldiers each year. Geographically, it's nestled in the humid subtropical climate of south-central Texas, where live oaks drape Spanish moss over red brick barracks that date back to the late 19th century. These structures, with their thick walls and arched windows, have seen everything from the Spanish-American War to modern deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Officially, it's a hub of medical excellence and military precision. Unofficially, whispers among the ranks speak of unexplained phenomena, doors slamming in empty halls, apparitions in period uniforms, and a pervasive sense of being watched. I've pored over declassified reports, spoken with veterans, and cross-referenced historical accounts. The Alamo's fall left 182 to 257 Texians dead, their bodies burned in pyres that scarred the earth. Paranormal investigators have documented electromagnetic spikes and cold spots there for decades. But at Fort Sam Houston, where soldiers live and train amid this cursed legacy, the stories take on a chilling modernity. Are these mere tricks of the mind, amplified by the stress of military life? Or is there something more, residual energies from that fateful battle seeping into the barracks, haunting those who serve today? As we dive into these accounts, remember, these are testimonies from real soldiers, shared in confidence. They come from different eras of service, but all converge on one truth: the Alamo's ground may be cursed, and its reach extends far beyond those ancient walls. What would you do if history refused to stay buried? Let's explore the shadows together. Chapter 1. Shadows in the Quad. I was a young private, fresh out of basic training at Fort Benning, assigned to the 232nd Medical Battalion at Fort Sam Houston in the summer of 2012. The transition from sand and pine forests to the humid sprawl of San Antonio felt like stepping into another world entirely. My first barracks assignment was Building 226 in the historic quad, the Old Post section. These weren't your standard cinder-block dorms. They were red brick beauties from the 1880s, with 12-foot ceilings, wide plank oak floors that groaned under every step, and tall arched windows framed by heavy wooden shutters. The air inside always carried a faint, musty smell, like old books mixed with gun oil and decades of boot polish. During in-processing, the cadre dropped casual warnings. Keep your head down after taps. The ghosts walk at midnight around here. I chuckled. Classic hazing, right? I'd survived the crucible. A few tall tales weren't going to rattle me. My roommate, Specialist Miguel Ramirez, A wiry medic from El Paso had been there 6 months already. He gave me the quick tour. Shared latrine down the hall, laundry in the basement. Day room with a busted ping-pong table. "Don't mind the creaks," he said with a half-smile. "Old buildings settle, or so they say." That first night, Ramirez pulled an overnight detail at the hospital, leaving me alone in the double occupancy room. Lights out at 20:20. I stripped to PT shorts, racked out on the bottom bunk, and tried to ignore how the room felt too big, too quiet. Around 0200, I snapped awake. Not from a dream, just an abrupt, bone-deep chill that sliced through the sticky Texas humidity. The window AC unit was off. Base was on energy-saving mode, windows cracked for airflow. My skin prickled with gooseflesh. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate boots in the corridor outside. Cavalry style, not modern jungle boots. Thud, thud, thud. Measured pacing, like a sentry walking post. I lay still, listening. It had to be the charge of quarters making security rounds. But the rhythm was off. Too slow, too purposeful, echoing in a way that suggested empty halls amplifying every impact. The pacing stopped right outside our door. I held my breath. The brass handle rattled. Once, twice. Not twisting, just testing, as if someone was deciding whether to enter. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Who's there?" I called, forcing calm into my voice like I'd been taught during land-nav drills. No response. Just silence, thick enough to choke on. I swung my legs out, bare feet hitting cold wood, grabbed my maglite from under the pillow, old habit from basic, and crept to the door. Through the peephole, nothing. The hallway stretched away under dim red emergency lights, shadows pooling in the corners, but empty. No CQ, no late-night wanderer. I exhaled, chiding myself. Nerves, new post-jitters. I turned back toward the bunk. That's when the whispering began. It started faint, like interference on an old field radio, then sharpened into words carried on the chill air. "Defend the line. Hold. Hold." A thick southern drawl, weary but resolute, the kind you'd hear from a frontier rifleman. My heart slammed against my ribs, like after a 12-mile ruck. The room's temperature plummeted. I could see my breath fog in short bursts. I spun the flashlight beam across the space. In the far corner, beside the window where moonlight sliced through the blinds, a shadow separated from the wall. Not vague, distinct. A tall figure in rough, homespun coonskin cap, tilted low, long rifle cradled in the crook of one arm. The face was obscured, but the posture was unmistakable, watchful, expectant. He didn't advance, didn't speak, just stared directly at me, unblinking. I froze, mouth dry. "Identify yourself," I managed, voice cracking like a boot camp recruit. The apparition didn't answer. Instead, the whispering swelled around me, overlapping voices now. The wall. They're breaching, powder low. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure dissolved into nothing, swallowed by the darkness. The whispers faded to static, then silence. I stood there until my legs shook. Flashlight beam trembling across empty corners. Sleep didn't come after that. I sat on my bunk until Revele, replaying every detail. When Ramirez stumbled in at dawn, bleary from his shift, I told him everything. Footsteps, rattling handle, the figure. He didn't laugh. "You saw Crockett," he said flatly, dropping his gear. "Or one of 'em. Happens to new guys sometimes. The Alamo's less than 2 miles away. Those boys never really left. They say the ground remembers the blood. You get used to it, or you don't. I researched it later, during downtime between classes. Davy Crockett fell defending the low barracks wall, musket in hand, refusing to yield. Was this a warning? A recruitment? A residual echo replaying the final stand? I started sleeping with my back to the wall, one eye open. Nights became a silent vigil. The footsteps returned, sometimes pacing, sometimes halting at the door. The whispers grew clearer, more urgent, and every time the shadow appeared, it seemed a little closer to the foot of my bunk. What if he wasn't just watching? What if he was waiting for me to answer the call? Chapter 2. The Phantom Drill Sergeant by Spring. 2015, I'd pinned sergeant and transitioned from trainee to instructor at the Army Medical Department Center and School. AMEDDC and S. Right there on Fort Sam, Houston. The promotion came with more responsibility, teaching combat casualty care to waves of new 68W medics, running trauma lanes, supervising IV starts and tourniquet drills under the blistering Texas sun. The barracks had seen upgrades since my private days. Fresh battleship grey paint on the walls, energy-efficient LED fixtures replacing the old buzzing fluorescents, even some updated HVAC that actually worked most of the time. But the underlying structure remained unchanged. Those same thick red brick walls from the 1880s, the wide hallways that carried sound like a megaphone, the stairwells that seemed to amplify every footfall into something deliberate and ominous. The historic quad still felt alive in ways the newer sections didn't. During the day, it was all sharp salutes, shouted commands, and the constant clatter of boots on concrete. At night, especially during the brutal summer heat waves that rolled in like clockwork, the place took on a different personality. Quieter, heavier, as if the buildings themselves were holding their breath. One particular night in late July stands out. A record heat wave had Fort Sam pushing 105 degrees Fahrenheit even after sunset, the kind of sticky, suffocating humidity that made PT shirts cling like second skin and turned every barracks room into a sauna, unless you ran the window unit full blast. Most of the trainees were out on a multi-day field exercise at Camp Bullies, practicing tactical combat casualty care under simulated fire. The barracks were unusually empty. Only a handful of us cadre remained behind for planning and admin. I was alone in the day room on the first floor of Building 104. Long tables, vending machines humming in the corner, motivational posters curling at the edges from years of AC moisture. I had my laptop open, prepping slides for the next week's block on hemorrhage control. Red pen marking up printed casualty cards. The clock on the wall read 2,250. I figured I'd knock out another hour, then rack out. That's when I first heard it. From somewhere outside, maybe the quad itself, came the unmistakable snap of a cadence call, "Left, right, left, sound off." The voice was deep, authoritative, old-school D.I. timbre. Not the motivational chants we use today with call and response flair. This was crisp, no nonsense, the way they drilled in the 40s and 50s. I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Probably some night detail running laps, I thought. But the quad lights were on full, and through the window I could see the grass empty, shadows stretching long under the floodlights. No silhouettes, no movement. The cadence continued growing closer. "Company, halt, left face, about face." Goosebumps prickled despite the heat. I stood, walked to the exterior door, and pushed it open. The muggy air hit like a wet towel, thick, almost chewable. Cicadas screamed in the live oaks. The parade ground lay silent and still. No troops, no drill sergeant barking orders, just the low hum of distant traffic from Interstate 35. I stepped back inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. It slammed, hard. Not a gentle close from the hydraulic arm, but a violent bang that rattled the frame and made the overhead lights flicker once. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, spinning around. The door was still locked in place, no wind, no one behind it. Then the sound shifted, upward, boots on stairs. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Slow, deliberate, ascending from the ground floor toward the second. Each step echoed with purpose, the way a seasoned NCO moves when he's about to dress down a formation. I moved to the stairwell door. I pushed it open. "This is Sergeant Ellis. Who's up there?" My voice carried louder than intended in the empty space. Silence for a beat. Then, from above, gravelly and unmistakable. "Fall in, soldier. The enemy's at the gates. You gonna stand there gawking or get in ranks?" My stomach dropped. That wasn't any voice I recognized. Not from cadre, not from trainees. It had the weight of command, the kind that makes junior enlisted snap to without thinking. Training kicked in. I took the stairs 2 at a time, hand on the rail, moving fast but controlled. Heart rate elevated but breathing steady, like approaching a potential hostile in a building clear. At the second-floor landing, the emergency light flickered, casting harsh shadows. He was there. Under the bulb, half in silhouette, I stood an older man, mid-50s maybe, in olive-drab wool fatigues straight out of World War II. Campaign hat pulled low, silver first sergeant stripes gleaming on his sleeves. Jump wings and campaign ribbons faded but visible. Gloved hands clasped behind his back. He turned slowly, eyes catching the light. Sharp, unblinking. "You think this is a game, Sergeant?" His voice was low, cutting. The Alamo fell because they weren't ready. Men died holding positions they couldn't hold because leadership failed to prepare them. "Are you ready?" I stopped dead on the landing. "Sir?" It came out more question than response. He raised one gloved hand, index finger pointed directly at my chest. "Discipline, vigilance, eternal watch. That's the price of this ground. Forget it, and you'll join the ones who did." Before I could form another word, he simply wasn't there. No fade, no swirl of mist, just gone. The air carried a faint whiff of old gunpowder, pipe tobacco, and oiled leather. The light steadied. The stairwell was empty. I stood there for what felt like minutes, listening to my own breathing. Eventually, I descended, checked the day room. Everything as I'd left it. Laptop still open. No signs of disturbance. The next morning, over coffee in the DFAC, I mentioned it, casually, to the first sergeant, a grizzled E8 who'd been at SAM since the 90s. He set his mug down slowly. "The Phantom DS," he said, no trace of humour. "Seen him since the 40s. Maybe earlier. Some say he's a holdover from the original garrison days, tied to the Alamo defenders. Others figure he's a WW2 vet who died here during training and never left. Either way, he shows up when standards slip. And cadence calls at odd hours, inspections nobody asked for. Usually means something's coming. Deployment, inspection, or just the base reminding us we're standing on borrowed time." I nodded, trying to play it cool. But that night, and many after, I started keeping earplugs in my kit. Didn't help. The cadence calls still drifted through the walls in my dreams. Left, right, left. Sometimes I'd wake to the faint echo of "Fall in" right outside my door. Was he training us? Warning us? Or was the base itself the eternal battlefield, and we were just the latest recruits in a war that started in 1836? I never saw him again face to face, but I never forgot the question he left hanging in the air. Are you ready? Chapter 3. Whispers from the Walls. In early 2018, I was deep into my rotation as an instructor for the 68W Combat Medic Specialist course at Fort Sam Houston. By then, I'd been on post long enough that the quirks of the historic buildings no longer surprised me, or so I told myself. My new billeting was in Building 139, part of the famous Quadrangle Complex. Constructed in 1881 from thick-cut Texas limestone, the U-shaped barracks wrapped around a central courtyard like a fortress. The structure was on the National Register of Historic Places, and its lower levels included the old guardhouse cells where, legend held, Apache leader Geronimo had once been briefly confined in the 1880s before transfer. Those walls, rough, porous limestone blocks stacked without mortar in places, were pockmarked with age, bullet scars from long-ago target practice, and faint scorch marks nobody could fully explain. At night, especially when the humidity hung heavy, the stone seemed to exhale, releasing a cool dampness that made the air feel alive. After a grueling 12-hour day, running trauma simulations, supervising Live IV insertions on training mannequins, critiquing tourniquet applications until my voice was hoarse, I finally hit the rack around 21:30. My room was on the second floor, end unit, shared with a quiet corporal who was already snoring softly on the top bunk. The window AC rattled like an old helicopter, pushing chilled air against the persistent Texas heat. I stripped to boxers, killed the overhead light, and collapsed onto the thin mattress, intending to sleep like the dead. Around 0300 I came awake, not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Something was wrong. The room felt colder than the thermostat setting could account for. Goose flesh raced up my arms despite the lingering warmth. Then I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the wall right beside my headboard. Not random, like rats or settling pipes, but deliberate. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause, rhythmic. Almost patterned, like someone tapping out Morse code on the other side of the stone. I lay perfectly still, ears straining. The sound grew slightly louder, more insistent. Curiosity overrode caution. I rolled onto my side, pressed my ear flat against the cold limestone. The surface was icy, unnaturally so, like touching a block pulled from a freezer. Through the stone came muffled voices. Spanish. Desperate, overlapping murmurs. Agua, por favor. Agua. El fuego. No, Mars. Water. Please. Water. The fire. No more. My high school Spanish and rusty phrases from 2 tours in the sandbox came flooding back. These weren't casual complaints. The tone carried agony, thirst, terror, the crackle of flames in the background like distant artillery. The Alamo siege, 13 days of bombardment, dwindling supplies, men dying of dehydration under the relentless sun before the final assault, and the pyres that followed. I knew the history cold, but hearing it, feeling it, through solid rock was something else entirely. I sat up slowly. Hello? My voice sounded thin in the dark. "Is someone there?" The scratching halted for a long second. Then it resumed, faster, harder, as if responding. A low, guttural moan vibrated through the wall, resonating in my chest like a subwoofer. The temperature plunged further. My breath fogged visibly now. Heart hammering, I reached for my phone on the nightstand, intent on recording audio, maybe calling the CQ runner. The screen lit up, 80% battery. I hit record. Nothing captured at first, just ambient hum. Then the voices swelled again, clearer. "Ayuda! El fuego nos consume! Los muros caen!" "Help! The fire consumes us! The walls are falling!" The phone screen flickered. Battery icon dropped to 60%, 40%, 20%. Dead. In seconds. No explanation, no heat, no overuse. Just gone. Panic clawed up my throat. I backed away from the wall, boots forgotten on the floor. That's when I saw it. A hairline crack in the plaster. Fresh. Not there when I'd gone to bed. Spreading like lightning across the surface. Fine grey dust sifted out. I'm carrying the faint smell of charred wood and old blood. The crack widened with a soft, grinding sound. From within, a skeletal hand pushed through, pale, fleshless fingers clawing at the air, reaching toward me. The nails were blackened, as if burned. A whisper, close enough to feel breath on my neck, though nothing was there. "Ayuda! Ayúdanos! Libera!" I didn't wait. I bolted barefoot into the hallway, slamming the door behind me, pounded on adjacent rooms until lights came on and half-dressed soldiers stumbled out. Bleary and confused. "Wall! Voices! Hand!" I managed between breaths. They followed me back. By the time we returned, maybe 3 minutes later, the crack was gone. Smooth plaster, no dust, no sign anything had happened. The room temperature had normalized. My phone powered back on at 78% when I plugged it in later. The next day, I reported it quietly to the platoon sergeant. He listened without interrupting, then sighed. "Old walls talk sometimes, especially in 139. Geronimo's cell is downstairs. Some say the Alamo dead got mixed in during expansions. Bodies burned nearby, ash in the soil. Construction stirred things up back in the 80s too. He advised hydration, sleep, maybe talking to behavioral health if it persisted. I dug deeper on my own. Historical records confirmed after the Alamo fell, Mexican forces disposed of remains in mass pyres near what became the fort's footprint. Unmarked graves dotted the area. Some bones surfaced during 20th century builds. Were those voices residual? Trapped echoes of the defeated? Or something more sentient? Souls bound to the limestone, crying out across time for water that never came. For mercy that never arrived. After that night, every shift felt watched. I'd catch myself glancing at walls during lectures, wondering if eyes were peering back from the other side. The scratching returned sporadically, always around 0300, always the same pattern. I started sleeping with my rack pulled away from the wall, but it didn't help. The voices found new paths. Through vents, under doors, even in the hum of the AC. One night, I woke to faint tapping on my locker, like fingernails begging entry. I never saw the hand again, but I felt it. Reaching, asking, waiting. How many more were sealed behind those stones? How long before the walls gave way entirely? And what would happen if they did? Chapter 4. The Midnight Formation. The year 2020 changed everything. COVID-19 protocols descended on Fort Sam Houston like a sudden fog bank, I turning the normally bustling post into something resembling a ghost town overnight. Training rotations were slashed, classrooms went virtual, and the historic quad, usually alive with the cadence of marching companies, fell eerily silent. Most barracks emptied as soldiers were sent home on leave or placed on restricted movement. I was among the skeleton crew left behind, essential personnel only, rotating through fireguard, security details, and minimal admin in near isolation. Masks were mandatory, social distancing enforced with painted lines on floors and sidewalks, hand sanitizer stations every 10 feet. The base felt hollowed out, like a fortress abandoned mid-siege. I was quartered in Building 104, again second floor, corner room, with a small balcony overlooking the main parade field. My nights were long and monotonous. Fireguard shifts from 2,200 to 0400, walking the dimly lit corridors, checking locked doors, and standing post on the balcony when the schedule called for it. The humidity had eased into a cooler November, but a persistent fog rolled in most evenings from the nearby San Antonio River, blanketing the quad in thick white mist that swallowed sound and light alike. One night, November 12th, 2020, if memory serves, I drew the 00020200 watch on the balcony. Visibility was near zero. The floodlights on the parade ground created glowing orbs in the fog, but you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The air was damp, carrying the faint metallic scent of impending rain. I leaned on the railing, M4 slung across my chest. Loaded mag, chamber empty, standard for interior guard, and scanning the emptiness out of habit more than expectation. The post was quiet. Too quiet. No distant hum of I-35 traffic. No laughter from the few occupied rooms below. Just the soft drip of condensation from the eaves and my own steady breathing behind the mask. At exactly 0000 hours, my watch beeped the hour. A bugle sounded. Not from any speaker system, not from a recording. Clear, brassy, piercing the fog like a knife. Reveille. But reveille doesn't play at midnight. The notes hung in the air, sharp and mournful, the way an old cavalry bugler might sound it at dawn on the frontier. I straightened, ears straining. The call ended, replaced by the low murmur of voices. Many voices, drifting up from the field below. I leaned forward, peering into the mist. At first, nothing but swirling grey. Then shapes began to coalesce, hazy at the edges, sharpening as if stepping out of developing film. Ranks? Dozens of men forming up in precise lines, shoulder to shoulder. They wore mismatched period clothing, buckskin hunting shirts, homespun wool trousers, wide-brimmed hats, some with coonskin caps. Muskets rested at shoulder arms, bayonets fixed, powder horns slung across chests. Not modern soldiers, not reenactors. These were ghosts of the Texian garrison, materialized under the floodlights that somehow failed to illuminate them fully. A taller figure moved along the front rank, limping slightly. Jim Bowie, perhaps, or someone channeling his legend. He paced with a large knife at his belt, voice carrying clear despite the distance and fog. "Steady, lads. Hold the line for the dawn. No man breaks ranks till we hear the pipes of reinforcements." My skin crawled. I keyed my radio. "This is Sergeant Ellis, Fireguard Post 4. I've got unauthorized personnel assembling on the parade field. Multiple individuals, armed appearance, period uniforms. Request MP response." Static hissed back. Then a voice, not the CQ, not dispatch, crackled through. "They're coming. Columns advancing. Artillery inbound. Hold position, boys. Hold. The radio died. No lights, no static. Just dead air. I slapped the PTT again. Nothing. Below, the formation continued. Orders snapped. Present. Arms. Muskets came up in unison, a sound like dry branches snapping. The fog thickened, carrying new smells. Black powder smoke, unwashed wool, the copper tang of blood. I could almost taste it on my tongue. I descended the interior stairs 2 at a time, boots thudding on concrete, exiting onto the ground level. The mist swallowed me as I stepped onto the grass. The formation was closer now, maybe 30 yards away, but still indistinct at the edges. I advanced cautiously, weapon at low ready, calling out, "This is U.S. Army security. Identify yourselves and stand down." No response, only the continued murmur of voices. "Powder's low, water gone 2 days. Santa Ana's, Lancers on the flank." A drum began, a slow, steady tattoo like a death march. I reached the edge of where the ranks should have been. The figures didn't react to my presence. Up close, they were translucent, edges flickering like bad video feed. Faces gaunt, eyes hollow, expressions fixed in grim determination. One turned slightly, young, bearded, no more than 20, and looked straight through me. His lips moved. Remember the Alamo." Then the formation began to dissolve, not vanish, fade gradually, ranks peeling away into the fog like smoke dispersing. Within seconds, the field was empty again. But the ground wasn't. Fresh footprints remained pressed into the damp grass, hundreds of them, boot heels and moccasin tracks from another century, leading in a straight line toward the direction of the real Alamo, less than 2 miles away. I stood there, breathing hard, until the fog began to lift with first light. When the day shift arrived, I reported the prints. MPS photographed them, measured, took statements. Official finding, atmospheric anomaly combined with dew and prior foot traffic. Fog illusions, the report read. No threat. But I knew better. That wasn't the only night. The bugle returned, always at 0000, 3 more times that month. Each time the formation appeared, more defined, voices clearer. Once I heard cannon fire in the distance, felt the ground tremble faintly as if artillery was landing miles away. During the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, similar sightings had been logged in old base journals. Formations in the mist, bugles at odd hours, before the post turned into an overflow hospital and morgue. History repeating, or warning us that another siege of disease, of uncertainty was upon us? I started dreading the midnight hour. Every fog bank made me tense, waiting for the brass notes to cut the silence. I wondered, lying awake in my rack afterward, if one night I wouldn't just observe, if the ranks would turn, extend a hand and pull me in to stand beside them. Hold for the dawn. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Fallen. By mid-2022, the pandemic restrictions had mostly lifted, but the scars remained. Fort Sam Houston was ramping back up to full capacity. Classrooms full again, trauma lanes running non-stop, medics graduating in waves. I'd requested a lateral move into behavioral health support, working as a Combat and Operational Stress Control NCO, attached to the embedded behavioral health teams. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of dismissing or downplaying my own encounters with the post's quirks, I was now the one sitting across from soldiers processing deployment trauma, moral injury, survivor guilt, and the invisible wounds that don't show up on X-rays. My office was in the old infirmary wing of Building 102, a section of the post that dated back to the early 1900s. I'm originally constructed as a hospital during the build-up to the Mexican-American War and later expanded for World War I casualties. The exterior was classic red brick with arched windows. The interior had been modernized with drop ceilings, fluorescent lights, and modular cubicles. But the bones were old. Thick plaster walls, high baseboards, wide hallways that still smelled faintly of carbolic soap and liniment, if you stood still long enough. My cubicle was on the second floor, corner unit, with a single window that looked southeast toward downtown San Antonio, and the faint silhouette of the Alamo Chapel against the skyline on clear days. One Thursday evening in late August, I was staying late to finish session notes and review intake forms. Most of the building had cleared out by 1900. The night shift behavioral health techs were downstairs in the secure wing. I had the lights dimmed to desk lamp level, air conditioner humming softly. The only other sound, the occasional creak of old floor joists settling. Around 2010, I heard it, a soft, muffled sob drifting through the HVAC vents. Not the dramatic crying you might expect in a horror movie, quiet, broken, almost restrained, like someone trying not to be overheard. It came from above, or maybe below. Hard to tell in these old ducts. At first, I thought a patient had returned to the waiting area or a colleague was having a private moment. But the building was supposed to be empty, except for me. I stood, listening. The sound repeated. 3 soft, hiccuping breaths, then silence. Then again. Closer this time, almost directly overhead. Curiosity and a strange sense of professional duty pulled me out of the cubicle. I grabbed my flashlight, habit, and headed toward the stairwell that led to the rarely used basement archives. The door was unmarked, always locked, but someone had left it ajar that night. Probably facilities doing inventory. I pushed through. The basement smelled of dust, old paper, and something faintly metallic. Emergency lights cast long yellow pools down the narrow corridor lined with metal shelving units stuffed with yellowed medical ledgers, personnel files from wars long past, and boxes labelled with dates going back to the 1890s. I followed the sound, now clearer, more distinct, past rows of shelves until I reached a small alcove where loose documents had spilled across a work table. There she was, not solid, not fully corporeal, but unmistakable. A woman in late 19th century nurse's garb, high-collared white blouse, long grey skirt, blood-stained apron tied at the waist, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her hair was pinned severely under a cap, face pale and drawn, eyes red-rimmed from crying. She knelt beside an invisible patient, hands moving in gentle, practiced motions, checking a non-existent pulse, pressing a cloth to an unseen wound, murmuring softly, "James. Oh, James, no, not you too. Stay with me, love. Just a little longer." Her voice was soft, southern accent softened by exhaustion. The name hit me like a gut punch. James. Common enough, but in context. I cleared my throat. "Ma'am?" She didn't startle. She simply paused, hands stilling, then slowly turned her head toward me. Her eyes were hollow, pupils dilated, as if staring into darkness, even in the dim light. For a moment, I thought she saw me, really saw me. Then her gaze passed through, unfocused. "The pyres burn eternal," she whispered. "They carried them here, on stretchers, the ones who lived long enough to scream. But most didn't. Most burned where they fell. The smoke. It never leaves the air. Papers on the table fluttered as if caught in a sudden draught. No windows down here, no vents blowing. A single sheet lifted, spun lazily and settled face up. An old muster roll from 1836 to 37. Names of Texian dead crossed out or marked KIA Alamo. Below it, a faded hospital admission log from 1846 listing post-battle treatments for survivors and stragglers who had been brought to makeshift aid stations nearby. She reached out, not toward me, but toward the paper. Her fingers passed through it. A small silver locket materialized on the table where her hand had been. Antique, tarnished, chain-broken. I picked it up carefully. Inside, behind cracked glass, a tiny daguerreotype of a man in buckskin, knife at his belt. Engraved on the back, "To Susanna from Jim. San Antonio, February 1836. Susanna Dickinson, the only adult Anglo survivor of the Alamo massacre. She had escaped with her infant daughter during the final assault, carrying news of the fall to Sam Houston. Her husband, Almarin Dickinson, died inside the walls. Local law sometimes spoke of widows and nurses who stayed behind to tend the wounded in the chaotic days after. Some never left. The apparition rose slowly, apron rustling though there was no sound. "Save them, soldier," she said, voice cracking. "The ones who come after. Tell them the fire still burns. Tell them we waited." Then she faded. First the edges, then the whole form, leaving only the scent of carbolic and faint wood smoke. I stood frozen for several minutes, locket in hand. Eventually I carried it upstairs, locked it in my desk drawer, and wrote an anonymous note to the post historian, suggesting it had been found during cleanup. The next week it was catalogued into the base museum collection with a vague provenance, but the sobs didn't stop. Over the following months, other soldiers in therapy began reporting similar experiences, blurring of timelines during sessions. One sergeant described seeing his fallen squadmate standing beside a Civil War amputee in the same room. A young private broke down, describing a vision of men in coonskin caps lying on litters, while modern medevac helicopters roared overhead. The historical dead and the modern wounded seemed to overlap, their pain echoing across centuries. I started burning sage in the office after hours. Contraband on a military installation, but the chaplain looked the other way. It dulled the sobs for a night or two, but they always returned, softer, more pleading. I began to wonder if the base wasn't just haunted by the Alamo's defenders, but by every layer of suffering it had absorbed: Mexican-American war casualties, influenza victims of 1918, Vietnam returnees with thousand-yard stares, Iraq and Afghanistan amputees, now the invisible casualties of endless deployments. What if the infirmary walls weren't just holding plaster and lath, but layers of unresolved grief? What if healing the present required acknowledging the past, not dismissing it as hallucination or stress, but sitting with it? I never saw Susanna again, but late at night, when the building creaked and the vents sighed, I sometimes whispered back, "We're trying. We're still trying." Chapter 6. The Cursed Watchtower. In the spring of 2023, Fort Sam Houston hosted a series of joint readiness exercises with elements from Joint Base San Antonio Lackland and Randolph, mostly Air Force security forces and medical evacuation units training alongside Army combat medics for aeromedical evacuation scenarios. The focus was interoperability, loading litters onto UH-60 Blackhawks, simulating casualty handoffs under chemical threat, practicing rapid airfield seizures with dummy patients. For me, it meant long nights pulling additional duty as perimeter security on the northwest edge of the post, manning one of the elevated observation towers that overlooked the training lanes and the outer wire fence line. The tower itself was modern, steel lattice construction, circa 2010's upgrade, equipped with night vision mounts, thermal optics, radio relay gear, and a small shelter shack at the top platform. But it sat on older foundations. Beneath the concrete pad and chain-link perimeter lay remnants of 19th century earthworks and ramparts that had once marked the outer defences when the post was first established. Historians on base occasionally pointed out how the fence line roughly paralleled the extended boundaries of the Alamo battlefield during Santa Anna's encirclement in 1836. Unmarked graves, mass burial pits, and scatter sites from the final assault were believed to lie scattered across that transitional zone. Some documented during earlier expansions, others still rumoured. I drew the graveyard shift, 0200 to 0600. The exercise was in full swing during daylight, but at night the lanes went dark except for chemlight markers and occasional vehicle headlights. My post was solitary, binoculars scanning the wire, radio checks every 30 minutes, coffee going cold in a thermos. The tower creaked in the wind, a low metallic groan that carried across the open ground. Thunderstorms had been building all week. That particular night, the sky was bruised purple, distant lightning flickering like artillery flashes on the horizon. Around 400, the first boom rolled in, not thunder, deeper, more deliberate, cannon fire, muzzle reports echoing from nowhere, the kind of heavy black powder artillery that shook the chest more than the ears. I froze mid-sip, thermos halfway to my lips. The radio crackled static. No incoming traffic. I keyed the mic. Tower 3 to range control. Did you copy that report? Sounded like ordnance. Nothing. Dead air. Then the lightning strobed again. Closer this time, illuminating the fence line in stark white. Through the NVGs I saw them, horsemen, dozens, charging in loose formation across the scrubland just beyond the wire. They wore tall shakos, dark uniforms with red facings, sabres drawn, lances couched. Mexican lancers from Santa Anna's army, spectral but moving with terrifying purpose. Their mounts were gaunt, eyes glowing faintly red in the thermal overlay. They didn't slow at the fence. They passed through it like smoke. Hooves silent on the grass, but kicking up phantom dust. "Contact! Hostile cavalry approaching perimeter!" I shouted into the radio, voice cracking despite years of training. Multiple mounted personnel, armed historical appearance, request immediate backup. The radio spat back garbled voices, not range control, but screams. Agonized cries in Spanish and English. "Los muros, se rompen!" The walls, they're breaking. Mixed with English shouts, "Fall back to the chapel! Powder's gone! Bayonets only!" My hands shook on the binoculars. Below the tower, the ground seemed to soften, grass turning to churned mud, the air thickening with the stench of black powder, blood, and burning hair. One lancer galloped directly beneath me, translucent sabre raised. As he passed, I felt the wind of his charge, cold, acrid. He thrust at a shape that materialized in front of him. A defender in buckskin and homespun, musket raised. The sabre passed through the phantom soldier's chest. The defender staggered, but didn't fall, instead countering with a bayonet thrust that met only air. "Retreat!" A new voice boomed in my ear, close, as if Lieutenant Colonel William Barrett Travis himself stood beside me on the platform. "To the interior! Hold the Alamo!" The vision escalated. Cannonballs, ghostly, glowing faintly orange, arced overhead, slamming into invisible walls with concussive thumps that rattled my teeth. Muskets cracked in ragged volleys. Men screamed as they were impaled, trampled, burned. The entire northwest sector became a flickering battlefield replay. The final assault of March 6th, 1836, compressed into minutes. I projected onto the modern training ground like a malfunctioning hologram. I hit the emergency klaxon. Lights should have snapped on across the post. QRF should have rolled. Instead, the tower lights dimmed, then surged, casting wild shadows. My radio was useless, overrun with overlapping transmissions from another time. Orders in Spanish, prayers in English, the unmistakable twang of a frontier fiddle playing a dirge beneath it all. Dawn crept in slowly, grey and reluctant. The storm passed without rain. The apparitions faded with the first pink light, lancers dissolving mid-charge, defenders crumbling to dust motes, cannon smoke thinning to morning mist. When the world stabilized, I descended the ladder on unsteady legs. The grass bore scorch marks, irregular black circles, like powder burns from muzzle flashes. No logical explanation. No spent casings, no fuel spill. MPs arrived an hour later for the routine sweep. They photographed the marks, took my statement, forwarded it up the chain with the usual unexplained environmental anomaly tag. After-action reports noted a temporary morale dip among participating units. Environmental factors cited as contributing to fatigue and hypervigilance. I requested a change in duty roster after that. No more towers. But the echoes lingered. Every time thunder rolled over San Antonio, I'd flinch, waiting for the cannon. On stormy nights, I'd catch myself listening for hoofbeats beyond the wire, for the desperate cry to hold the line. The base sits on contested ground, literally and figuratively. Modern exercises stir the soil. Live fire drills shake the earth. Helicopters beat the air like artillery barrages. Perhaps we were waking something that had never fully slept. Perhaps the curse wasn't vengeance, but defense. Eternal sentries refusing to yield the perimeter one more time. I still wonder if I'd answered the call, if I'd shouted back, "Holding!" Would the vision have pulled me down into the ranks? Or was it enough to simply bear witness? The watchtower stands empty most nights now, but on clear evenings, when the wind is right, you can still hear the faint, distant thunder of hooves approaching the wire. Chapter 7. Breaking the Curse. By January 2024, my time at Fort Sam Houston was drawing to a close. 22 years of service, multiple deployments, promotions, and enough midnight watches to last several lifetimes. I had requested terminal leave and transition to the reserves, but before I left, one question gnawed at me harder than any deployment debrief. Could the curse, if that's what it truly was, be lifted? Or at least quieted? The encounters had never stopped entirely. They had evolved. The footsteps in the quad were softer now, almost respectful. The Phantom DS no longer barked cadence outside my window. Instead, I sometimes caught the faint echo of a single "well done" drifting down the stairwell after a long training day. The whispers from the walls had faded to occasional sighs, like exhausted sentries finally allowed to stand down. But the wait remained. The post still felt watched, not maliciously, but expectantly, as if unfinished business lingered in the limestone and red brick. I confided in Chaplain Major Elena Vasquez during one of our routine resiliency briefings. She was new to the post, but no stranger to the paranormal side of military life. She had served at Gettysburg and the Presidio before Sam Houston. After I laid out the full chronology, every sighting, every voice, every unexplained scorch mark, she listened without interruption, then said simply, "Sometimes the dead don't need exorcism. They need resolution." We decided on a quiet vigil. No fanfare, no press release, no paranormal investigation team with EMF meters and spirit boxes. Just 2 soldiers, a small team of volunteers from the post chapel, and permission from the garrison command to use the quadrangle chapel after hours. The chapel itself, built in 1909 on what had once been open parade ground, was already a place of memory. Plaques lined the walls honoring Alamo defenders, Spanish-American war dead, World War I nurses, and every conflict since. It felt like neutral ground. We scheduled it for a Friday night in March 2024, close to the anniversary of the final assault. No candles at first, fire hazard on federal property, but we brought battery-powered lanterns, a small wooden cross, a Bible, and a printed list of every known name associated with the Alamo fallen, compiled from historical records and post archives. We also included a short roster of more recent losses. Soldiers from Sam Houston who had died in training accidents, in combat overseas, or by their own hand in the barracks. If the ground remembered 1836, it remembered 2003, 2011, 2021 too. At 2300 we gathered inside. The chapel smelled of polished wood and old hymnals. We arranged chairs in a loose circle near the altar, left the overhead lights off, and let the lanterns cast warm pools across the pews. Chaplain Vasquez opened with a simple prayer for peace across time, for the defenders who held the line until there was no line left, for the attackers who followed orders into slaughter, for every soul who had suffered and died on or near this soil. We read the names aloud, slowly, deliberately. Crockett, Bowie, Travis, Dickinson, Bonham. Each one spoken into the quiet, like dropping stones into still water. After the historical list, we read the modern ones. Staff Sergeant Michael Reyes, KIA Ramadi, 2006. Private First Class Lauren Carter, Training Accident 2019. Specialist Jamal Hayes, Suicide 2022. The air grew heavier with each name, but not oppressive. More like a held breath finally being released. Around 0045, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature didn't drop dramatically this time. Instead, it steadied, as if the room had found equilibrium. Shadows lengthened along the walls, then detached, subtle at first, then clearer. Figures materialized in the lantern light, not aggressive, not menacing. They simply stood. Crockett near the front pew, coonskin cap in hand. Bowie leaning on his knife like a cane. A nurse in blood-stained apron, Susanna, perhaps, hands clasped. Behind them, ranks of Mexican lancers and infantry, heads bowed. Interspersed among them were modern silhouettes, soldiers in ACUS and OCP, helmets tucked under arms, faces I recognized from faded photos in the behavioral health files. No one spoke at first. Then Chaplain Vasquez asked the question we had rehearsed. "Why do you linger here?" The response came as a collective whisper, layered from many throats. Many eras, unavenged, ground desecrated, promises broken. We had anticipated this. Recent construction, new medical training facilities, expanded parking lots had disturbed soil near the old western boundary. Ground-penetrating radar during planning had flagged anomalies, but the project pushed through with mitigation that amounted to little more than a brief archaeological pause. Bones and artifacts had been quietly boxed and stored, not reinterred with ceremony. Vasquez nodded. "We hear you. We will seek to make it right." The figures didn't vanish immediately. Instead, the air filled with faint sounds, the scratch of quill on paper, the clink of cartridge boxes, the soft sob of someone finally allowed to grieve. Objects in the chapel moved, subtly. A Bible page turned on its own. A lantern flickered without wind. From the back of the room came the unmistakable click of an EVP recorder one of the volunteers had set up. Dig, release us, honor the fallen. The next morning we took the evidence, audio files, photographs of moved objects, our written statements, and presented it to the garrison commander. To his credit, he didn't dismiss it. He authorized a discreet archaeological survey of the disturbed areas, coordinated with the Texas Historical Commission. In late April, small teams excavated under controlled conditions. They recovered musket balls, uniform buttons stamped with Mexican eagles, fragments of bone consistent with 1836 trauma patterns, and, most poignantly, a small silver crucifix engraved with a name, Juan. The remains and artifacts were catalogued and then reinterred with full military honours in a private ceremony at the post cemetery in early June. A marker was placed. To the defenders and the defended, rest eternal. Chaplain Vasquez presided. I stood in the formation, still in uniform for a few more weeks. Sightings dropped sharply after that. The footsteps ceased. The whispers fell silent. The tower remained quiet even during thunderstorms. On my final night on post, out processing, complete, duffel packed, I walked the quad one last time at 0200. No pacing boots, no bugle, just crickets and the rustle of live oak leaves. Then, near building 226, my first barracks, a single figure appeared under a street lamp. Crockett, or his echo. Coonskin cap low, rifle at rest. He didn't speak aloud, but the words formed clear in my mind. "Well fought, son. Hold the line, but not forever." He saluted, slow, deliberate, then faded into the shadows. I returned the salute. Did we break the curse, or did we merely negotiate a ceasefire? The ground still remembers. History doesn't erase itself. But perhaps, for the first time in nearly 2 centuries, it rests a little easier. As I drove out the main gate the next morning, the Alamo silhouette sharp against the dawn sky, I felt something lift. Not gone, but quieter. A burden shared, acknowledged, honoured. The Alamo is still hallowed ground. But maybe, just maybe, it's no longer cursed.